Today we're looking at Krishna's Ealam. E-A-L-A-M. Ealam? Sure. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Krishna's Ealam is a kind of green ink. And to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Pilot Metropolitan with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Before we go to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, immediately dunk it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is it pushes straight up. A very light green is barely noticeable on the chromatography. Only if you look at the white underneath it do you see it. Then we get the yellows and the greens that are there. It's really quite nice. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And we see the line across the bottom is much more noticeable and it's kind of a mint green color. Then it starts pushing that yellow and the darker green up. With the exception of that mint green line on the bottom, it pretty much looks the same. But that line makes me feel like there might be some resistance to this ink. Speaking of resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more important, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it really feathers out and becomes blurry. Now, I can read that word high because I wrote it and I write it on all of these. I'm afraid I would lose something important in note-taking, so I would not use this as a note-taker. Water, we see that all of the dark green comes up off the page, leaving the yellow behind. The yellow looks to really be the strong part in this ink, which is weird because on the chromatography that pushed away more than the mint green. Pen Flush did exactly the same thing water did, which makes me feel you're not getting any extra effect for using Pen Flush to get this out of your pen. Bleach completely obliterates except that mint green. It's a very light mint green left behind from the bleach, which makes me a little worrisome. But what I would say is test this in a more inexpensive pen. I haven't had any staining problems from this ink, but test it in a more inexpensive pen for yourself before putting it into one of your expensive pens. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Krishna's Ealam has a viscosity of 2.29, which makes it a normal flow for this ink. To find my dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Krishna's Ealam has a dry time of 8 seconds. Now that's an average dry time on all 6 of those, but 8 seconds is fast. It's very fast. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in bottle form back when I ordered about 30 or so bottles from Krishna Inks. And there was a lot in there that were great surprises. I would have had no idea about this, even what to think, based on its name. Very nice ink. So to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's look at some Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, but look at the shading that's going on with this ink. This light is way too high. I am sorry. There we go. Look at the shading that is going on with this ink. It's great. This is one of, if not the best shading ink I have ever seen. Shading greens I've ever seen. It's wonderful. Great. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and yes, shading please. All over it. Only 6 seconds to dry. Now, the medium. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and beautiful, beautiful shading. Look at the word jumps. That part of the U gets this really nice like lemongrass green. And then it gets to a very, very dark green like you see on golf courses, that tiny little, the green's green. It's great. Just wow. 11 seconds to dry. The extra fine and the medium both show us we're going to get a ton of variation, and we do. The smear test, I'm not sure if you would be able to recover this. Looking at rhodia paper, we get no bleeding. Yes, we do get ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread. It does have some haloing, no sheen, and it gets shading all over it. Great shading all over it. Just wow. The extra fine, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and we lost the shading here with the extra fine. 11 seconds to dry. The medium, look at that darker tone that's the base. Just nice. Just wow. It has no feather, no spread, no consistent haloing. It does get haloing where it was darker. It doesn't get it where it was lighter. So we get some haloing, but like on Quick, the bottom of the Q where it's dark, we have some halo. But on the U where it's light, we don't have any halo. So, you get some, but not all, on that haloing. We have no sheen. We do get shade, plenty of shade, with the medium. It's just really nice. 18 seconds to dry. Now, when we look at the scrubbies, both of them show us not a lot of color variation, which was true for the extra fine, not so true for the medium. The smear test says you don't get to recover this because you wrote on Tomoe River paper. So, rhodia paper. Now, that's not a bleed spot because it doesn't line up with anything underneath. That's me being sloppy. Unfortunately, all too common an occurrence. It has no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does show some shading, nowhere near the amount of shading that we saw in the Clairefontaine. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and yes, shading all over the place. This has been a consistent shader. I'm glad I have a bottle. I wish it was a bigger bottle. 7 seconds to dry. The medium, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Yes, shading. Now the shading is not as big here. We see it more in Lazy. We see it some in Fox. We do not see it in Brown or in The. We barely see any in Quick. It's the paper. It's the coating. It's got it sitting on top longer, and it's sort of messing with its ability to shade. But we still get some lovely shading on the rhodia at only 13 seconds to dry. The scrubby for the extra fine and the fine show us some color variation. The extra fine and the medium. The medium shows us a little less color variation, but we got less color variation in the writing itself. Now the extra fine shows a ton of color variation, and we got it. We got it there. So nice. The smear test. The smear shows we're not going to recover this. We're not going to recover this if we smear. I'm trying to remember now if I'm talking about the shading of the extra fine, where it does show some really nice shading in areas. Very nice light color. Very, very nice. Just nice. So I decided to test this particular ink out on a different tone paper. I put it onto a yellow tone to see what happens with that green. The yellow rhodia gives us no bleed. That's me being sloppy. Sorry. Gives us no ghosting. And look at that. Even with the change in tone for being on a yellow background, it gets a little bit lighter. It's still a lovely, lovely green. If you like green ink, get a couple of bottles of this. Krishna needs to make some larger bottles, just because it takes us so long to get them here in America. It takes a long time because other than India, it's a ship international, so it's going to take some time. Now, the thing that did happen with the yellow paper, the 1.1 had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, almost no shading in it. So we lost a bunch of that shading for toning everything down. Beautiful color, loss of shading. Extra fine, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, loss of shading. We lost the shading here again. Again, it's just it being lighter. The 7 seconds to dry. The medium, a much darker tone. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Yes, shading all over the place, and it's fantastic. At only 13 seconds to dry. Now, when we look at the scrubbies lied. The medium said we're not going to get any shading, and we did. And the extra fine said we're going to get shading, and we didn't.
The smear test, you're likely not recovering if you smear this. So I tested on this hazel paper, the hazel paper I ordered when I ordered all those inks. Once again, here's that notebook. I would recommend anybody to order a bunch of inks from them directly. Take the time and get a couple of these notebooks, because the paper, it's very toothy, but on a walk-around notebook, on the pocket-sized notebook, it is great. I don't know that I want this as a big notebook. I just don't feel the paper's for me, but I would not turn down a big notebook because the paper performs so well. No bleeding, no ghosting. No ghosting in a pocket-sized notebook. Moleskine, learn a lesson. Moleskine, order some of their notebooks. Figure out what paper they're using. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading. No shade here. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Light shading, like over looks a little bit darker. The right side of quick looks a little bit darker. The left side of brown a little bit darker. So we are seeing a little bit of shading here, just not a ton. Only 3 seconds to dry. Now the medium, ignoring where I put my thumb when I write, and that's what tends to happen right there all the time. I don't know why. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. And again, almost no shading. We really have to look to things like brown over to dog. We see a shade difference. If we look at the to fox, we see a shade difference. We don't see a lot in fox to dog. They look very close in tone. But brown and lazy certainly are different tones. So we get shading. It just occurs much more word to word than within the word. 4 seconds to dry. Now when I look at the scrubby, the extra fine shows us we're going to get shading. We do. The K is a little darker, sure, over is a little darker, part of brown. We do get shading. It doesn't exactly match in the shading. It doesn't show nearly as much in the extra fine as we did get in the writing. We did get some in the writing within the words. It just doesn't show as well here in the scrubby. The medium shows almost no shading, but we did see some shading in the writing. The smear test says on both you don't get to recover this if you smear it. So I tested this on Levenger paper. We had no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. When we go to the extra fine, it's the same tone. We have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We are seeing some of that light shading in there. The shows some shading. Quick shows some shading. Lazy shows a little bit of shading. The 5 seconds shows a little bit of shading. Just not a ton on this paper. We go to the medium. We get no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We are seeing some shading. Once again, ignore where I place my thumb. But we do see dog is a different tone than jumps. A different tone than 7 seconds. A different tone again than brown. So we do see shading. It's word to word, not within the word. 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows no shading. We really didn't see any shading. The scrubby of the medium shows no shading. We did see some shading word to word. So I don't know, if I did another one, I might see a slightly different shade. Now the smear test says we're not going to get to recover this if we do smear it. And that's all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Krishna's Ealam, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And I've chosen Diamine's Matador Red because that's a beautiful red to go with this very interesting green. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask if you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Krishna's Ealam? I think this ink brings the shading. And for someone like me that loves great shading inks, this one is at the top of the charts. It truly is great. It behaves well, performs well. Every nib, every paper, it does amazing things. Thanks for watching.